The rain hammered against the windows of the massive Blackwood mansion like angry fists. Inside the grand kitchen, Maria Santos wiped down the marble countertops for the third time that evening, her weathered hands moving in practiced circles. At 52, she had been cleaning houses for over 20 years, but nothing had prepared her for the sheer size and luxury of this place. The Blackwood estate stretched across 40 acres of pristine Connecticut countryside. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings so high they seemed to touch the clouds. Persian rugs worth more than most people's homes covered polished marble floors. Oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors stared down from gilded frames, their eyes following Maria wherever she went. But, despite all the wealth surrounding her, the house felt empty. Cold. Like a beautiful museum where no one was allowed to touch anything. Maria had been working here for 3 months now, ever since her previous employer, Mrs. Henderson, had passed away. The job paid well, better than anything she had ever earned, but the loneliness was suffocating. The other staff members kept to themselves, speaking only when necessary. They treated her differently because of her skin color, though they were careful never to say anything directly. She was the only black employee in the house, and she felt it every single day. The head butler, Mr. Pemberton, was a thin man with silver hair who spoke with a crisp British accent. He had made it clear from day one that Maria was to stay in her designated areas and not wander through the main parts of the house unless specifically cleaning them. The cook, Mrs. Fairfax, barely acknowledged her existence, communicating only through sharp nods and pointed gestures. Most mysterious of all was the owner of the house himself, Alexander Blackwood. Maria had been working here for 3 months and had seen him exactly twice. Both times, he had been getting into the back seat of his black Bentley, driven by what she assumed was his personal chauffeur. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, always wearing expensive-looking dark suits. But he moved differently than she expected a billionaire to move. There was something humble about his posture, the way he carried himself. From her small window in the staff quarters, Maria had watched him sometimes in the evenings. While she folded laundry or mended uniforms, she would see him walking through the gardens alone, his hands clasped behind his back, his head down as if carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. The other staff whispered about him in hushed tones. They said he was cold, demanding, impossible to please. They said he fired people without warning for the smallest mistakes. They said he looked right through the help as if they were invisible. But Maria had noticed something different during those brief glimpses. When she had accidentally dropped a tray of silverware in the hallway 2 weeks ago, she had expected to be fired immediately. Instead, the man she thought was the chauffeur had appeared around the corner, helped her pick up the scattered forks and knives, and told her not to worry about it. His voice had been kind, gentle even. "These things happen," he had said, handing her the last spoon. "No harm done." She had thanked him profusely, assuming he was just a kind employee who understood what it was like to work for demanding rich people. He had smiled at her, a real smile that reached his eyes, and continued down the hallway. That interaction had stayed with her for days. In a house where she felt invisible, someone had shown her basic human kindness. Tonight, as the storm raged outside, Maria was working later than usual. Mrs. Fairfax had spilled red wine all over the dining room table linens during dinner preparation, and, of course, it was Maria's job to clean up the mess. She scrubbed at the stubborn stains, her back aching from bending over the large table. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 11 times. The last bus to her neighborhood had left an hour ago. Maria sat down heavily in one of the dining room chairs, something she would never normally do. But she was exhausted, and the reality of her situation was sinking in. She lived in a small apartment 20 miles away in a part of town that most taxi drivers refused to visit after dark. She had exactly $12 in her purse, not enough for a taxi even if she could find one willing to take her home. It looked like she would be spending the night in the staff quarters, sleeping on the narrow cot in the storage room that served as her break area. It wouldn't be the first time, though the thought of another night in this cold, unfriendly house made her heart heavy. She pulled out her phone to call her daughter, Carmen, who was a sophomore at the local community college. Carmen was the light of Maria's life, the reason she worked so hard at jobs that often treated her poorly. Her daughter was studying nursing, maintaining a 3.8 GPA while working part-time at a local clinic. Maria was determined to give Carmen opportunities she had never had. "Mija," she said when Carmen answered. "I'm going to be late tonight. The bus. I missed the last one." "Mama, again?" Carmen's voice was filled with concern. "Can't you ask someone for a ride?" Maria looked around the empty dining room. "Ask who?" "The staff who barely spoke to her. Mr. Pemberton, who would probably report her to Mr. Blackwood for bothering him with personal matters." "It's okay, baby. I'll figure something out. You focus on your studies." "I can try to borrow my friend's car." "No," Maria said firmly. "You don't drive in this weather." "I'll be fine. I love you." After hanging up, Maria sat in the silence of the grand dining room. Rain continued to lash against the tall windows, and, somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled like an approaching train. She pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders and tried to push down the familiar feeling of being completely alone in the world. Footsteps echoed in the hallway outside the dining room. Maria quickly stood up, smoothing down her uniform and grabbing her cleaning supplies. If it was Mr. Pemberton, she would be in serious trouble for sitting in the formal dining room. But it wasn't the butler who appeared in the doorway. It was the chauffeur. He was wearing dark jeans and a simple gray sweater instead of his usual suit, and his dark hair was slightly damp from the rain. He looked surprised to see her there so late. "Oh, I'm sorry," Maria said quickly, gathering her things. "I was just finishing up the table linens. Mrs. Fairfax had an accident with the wine, and I wanted to make sure the stains came out before they set." "I'll get out of your way." The man stepped further into the room, his brow furrowed with concern. "It's quite late for you to still be working. Is everything all right?" Maria hesitated. There was something about his voice, his manner, that invited honesty. But she had learned over the years that sharing personal problems with employers or their staff often led to judgment or dismissal. "Yes, sir. Everything's fine. I just wanted to make sure everything was perfect before I left." "How are you getting home in this weather?" The question caught her off guard. In 3 months of working here, no one had ever asked about her commute or shown any interest in her welfare outside of her work duties. "The bus," she lied, not wanting to admit her predicament. He glanced toward the windows where the storm continued to rage. "The buses stopped running an hour ago." Maria's shoulders sagged. There was no point in pretending anymore. "Yes, I know. I'll stay here tonight. In the staff quarters. I've done it before." Something shifted in the man's expression. His eyes, which she now noticed were a warm brown color, filled with what looked like genuine concern. "That's not acceptable," he said quietly. "No one should have to sleep in a storage room because they can't get home safely." "It's really okay," Maria insisted. "I don't mind. I'm grateful to have a job here. I don't want to cause any trouble." The man was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. Then, he made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "I'll drive you home." Maria's eyes widened. "Oh, no, sir. I couldn't ask you to do that. The storm is terrible, and I live quite far away. In a neighborhood well, it's not very nice." "I'm not asking," he said gently but firmly. "I'm offering. And I don't care where you live or what the neighborhood is like. Everyone deserves to sleep in their own bed. But what if Mr. Blackwood needs the car? I don't want you to get in trouble because of me." A strange expression crossed the man's face, something that looked almost like amusement mixed with sadness. "I don't think that will be a problem," he said. "Give me 10 minutes to get the car, and I'll meet you at the service entrance." Before Maria could protest further, he was gone, leaving her standing in the dining room with her heart pounding. She couldn't believe someone was willing to drive 20 miles in a storm just to get her home safely. It was the kind of kindness she had almost given up believing existed in the world. She gathered her purse and coat from the staff break room, her mind racing. She didn't even know the chauffeur's name. In all her months here, they had never been properly introduced. Yet he was willing to go out of his way for her, a gesture that meant more than he could possibly know. As she waited by the service entrance, Maria thought about Carmen and how proud her daughter would be to know that there were still good people in the world. People who saw beyond skin color and job titles to the human being underneath. The rain had turned to sleet, making the night even more treacherous. When headlights appeared through the darkness, Maria felt a mixture of gratitude and nervousness. She was about to spend 20 minutes alone in a car with a man she barely knew, driving through unfamiliar roads in dangerous weather. But, as the sleek black sedan pulled up to the entrance, something told her she could trust him. Maybe it was the memory of how he had helped her with the silverware without making her feel clumsy or stupid. Maybe it was the genuine concern in his eyes tonight. Or maybe it was simply that after 20 years of being overlooked and undervalued, someone was finally treating her with basic human dignity. The passenger door opened, and warm air escaped into the cold night. "Ready?" the chauffeur asked, and Maria could hear the smile in his voice. She hurried to the car, her heart lighter than it had been in months. As she settled into the leather seat, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the window, a tired woman in a simple black uniform, about to be driven home by a stranger who had shown her more kindness than anyone at the Blackwood estate. She had no idea that she was sitting next to Alexander Blackwood himself, the billionaire owner of the house where she had spent 3 months feeling invisible. And she had no idea that this ride home would be the beginning of a story that would challenge everything both of them believed about class, worth, and the barriers that society builds between people. As they pulled away from the mansion and into the storm, Maria closed her eyes and said a quiet prayer of gratitude for unexpected angels who appeared when you needed them most. The windshield wipers beat a steady rhythm against the sleet, and the warm car felt like a sanctuary after the cold emptiness of the mansion. For the first time in months, Maria felt like she mattered to someone. She was about to discover just how much she mattered, and to whom. The leather seats of the sedan were warmer and more comfortable than any furniture in Maria's small apartment. As they drove through the storm, she tried to make herself as small as possible, acutely aware that she was dripping rainwater onto what was probably very expensive upholstery. "Thank you again for this," she said quietly, watching the chauffeur navigate the winding roads with practiced ease. "I promise I'll pay you back somehow." "Maybe I could clean your personal car, or please don't worry about that," he interrupted gently. "It's really no trouble at all." The radio played soft classical music, something Maria recognized from her years of working in wealthy homes. She had learned to identify Mozart from Beethoven, not because she particularly enjoyed classical music, but because knowing such things helped her blend into the background more effectively. "Do you mind if I ask your name?" she ventured, then quickly added, "I'm sorry, I should have asked before now." "I'm Maria Santos." "It's nice to officially meet you, Maria," he said, and she could hear the warmth in his voice even though she couldn't see his face clearly in the dim light. "I'm Alex." "Have you worked for the Blackwood family long, Alex?" There was a pause, long enough that Maria wondered if she had overstepped some boundary. Rich families often had strict rules about their employees discussing personal matters. "Most of my life, actually," he finally answered. "It's complicated family business." Maria nodded, understanding. Wealthy families were always complicated. She had worked for enough of them to know that money didn't solve problems, it just created different, more elaborate ones. "The house is beautiful," she said, trying to fill the comfortable silence. "I've never worked anywhere so grand. Sometimes I feel like I'm in a museum." "It can feel that way," Alex agreed, and there was something sad in his voice. "Beautiful but empty. All those rooms, and most of them are never used. It must get lonely for Mr. Blackwood, living in such a big house all by himself." Again, that pause. "Why do you think he's lonely?" The question surprised her. Maria glanced at his profile, illuminated briefly by passing streetlights. There was something about the way he asked, as if her opinion truly mattered. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I've only seen him twice, and very briefly. But when I watch him walking in the gardens in the evenings, he looks heavy. Like he's carrying something difficult." "You watch him in the gardens?" Maria felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. "Not on purpose."
I mean, I'm not spying or anything.
My window in the staff quarters overlooks that part of the grounds, and sometimes when I'm working late, I see him walking.
He always looks so alone.
They had reached the highway now, and the storm seemed to be lessening slightly. Alex was quiet for several minutes, and Maria worried that she had said too much. Maybe it was inappropriate for staff to observe and comment on their employers' personal moments.
What do the other employees say about him? Alex asked finally. Maria hesitated.
Speaking negatively about an employer to what was essentially another employee felt like a betrayal, even if some of the things she had heard were troubling. They say he's very demanding, she said carefully. That he has high standards.
And, what do you think?
I think, Maria said slowly, choosing her words with care, that people sometimes see what they expect to see. If you expect someone to be cold and heartless because they have money, then every action gets interpreted that way.
That's very wise.
My grandmother used to say that hurt people often hurt people, but it doesn't mean they're bad people. Maybe Mr. Blackwood has his own struggles that make it hard for him to connect with others. They were entering Maria's neighborhood now, and she could see Alex taking in the surroundings. The streetlights were fewer and farther between here. Many of the buildings had barred windows and graffiti-covered walls. Trash littered the sidewalks, and several of the storefronts were boarded up. Maria felt the familiar shame wash over her. This was where she lived, where she raised her daughter. It wasn't much, but it was home, and they were safe. Turn left at the next light, she directed quietly.
It's just a few more blocks. If Alex was bothered by the neighborhood, he didn't show it.
He drove with the same careful attention he had shown on the winding roads near the mansion, treating her directions with respect rather than judgment. That building there, Maria pointed to a 5-story brick apartment building that had seen better decades. The 3rd floor. Alex pulled up to the curb and put the car in park, but he made no move to leave immediately.
He sat quietly for a moment, looking up at the building. "This is where you live with your daughter?" he asked. Maria was surprised that he knew about Carmen.
"Yes. She's in college now.
Studying nursing."
"You must be very proud." "I am," Maria said, and, for the first time that evening, her voice held pure joy. "She's going to help people, make a real difference in the world. She's everything I hoped she would become. She gets that from her mother, I imagine. The desire to help people, to care for others." The compliment caught Maria off guard. In her line of work, she was used to criticism or indifference.
Genuine praise was rare.
"I should let you get home," she said, reaching for the door handle. "I'm sure your family is worried about you being out in this weather." "No family waiting for me," Alex said quietly.
"Just the empty house."
Something in his tone made Maria pause. There was a loneliness in those words that resonated with her own experience of feeling isolated in a crowd of people.
"Well," she said softly, "maybe that will change someday. Sometimes the best things come when we least expect them."
She opened the door and stepped out into the cold night air. The sleet had turned back to rain, but it was lighter now.
She leaned down to the open window. "Thank you, Alex. Really. This meant more to me than you could possibly know."
"It was my pleasure, Maria. Truly." She stood on the sidewalk and watched the sedan's taillights disappear into the night, feeling like she had just experienced something important, though she couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. The lobby of her apartment building smelled like cleaning products and old cooking, familiar scents that had become home over the past 3 years. Maria climbed the 2 flights of stairs to her floor, her feet aching in her sensible black shoes. She unlocked the door to apartment 3B and stepped inside. The space was small, just 2 bedrooms, a tiny kitchen, and a living room that barely fit a couch and television. But it was clean and warm, filled with photographs of Carmen's achievements and small decorations that Maria had collected over the years. Carmen was at the kitchen table, surrounded by textbooks and papers, a cup of coffee growing cold at her elbow. "Mama," she said, jumping up to hug her mother.
"I was so worried. How did you get home in this storm?"
"Someone gave me a ride," Maria said, still feeling the warmth of unexpected kindness.
One of the other employees. A very nice man named Alex.
Carmen studied her mother's face with the perceptive eyes of someone who had learned early to read emotional undercurrents.
You look different, she said. Happier. Do I?
Maria hung up her coat and kicked off her shoes, grateful to be home.
It was just nice to be treated with kindness. Sometimes when you work in houses like that, you start to feel invisible. Like you don't matter.
You matter to me, Carmen said fiercely.
And you should matter to them too. You work harder than anyone I know.
Maria pulled her daughter into another hug, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and the faint smell of coffee that always seemed to cling to Carmen during exam periods.
I'm proud of you, Nija, she said. Not just for your grades, though those are wonderful. I'm proud of the person you're becoming.
Compassionate and strong and determined.
I learned that from watching you, Carmen replied.
You've never let anyone make you feel small, even when they tried. They sat together at the kitchen table, and Carmen insisted on making her mother a sandwich while she finished her studying. Maria watched her daughter, this incredible young woman who was going to be a nurse, who was going to spend her life caring for others, and felt a deep sense of gratitude for the path that had led them here. Tell me about this Alex person, Carmen said as she buttered bread.
You mentioned him once before, didn't you? When you dropped the silverware. Yes, he's the one who helped me clean it up.
He seems different from the others.
Kinder. Different how?
Maria thought about the question. He looks at me like I'm a person, not just the help. He asks questions like he genuinely cares about the answers. That's how everyone should treat you, Carmen said with the righteous indignation of youth.
In a perfect world, yes.
But we don't live in a perfect world, baby. We live in this world, and, in this world, kindness is a gift.
When someone gives it to you, you appreciate it.
They talked for another hour about Carmen's classes, her plans for the future, her dreams of working in pediatric nursing. Maria listened with pride and wonder, amazed that this brilliant, compassionate young woman had come from her. As she finally settled into bed that night, Maria found herself thinking about Alex and their conversation during the drive. There had been something almost familiar about talking with him, as if they had known each other longer than a few brief encounters in the hallway. She thought about his questions about Mr. Blackwood, his interest in her perspective on loneliness and isolation.
Most people in his position wouldn't care what the housekeeper thought about their employer's emotional state.
But, then, again, most people wouldn't drive 20 miles in a storm to get the housekeeper home safely either. Maria fell asleep with a smile on her face, looking forward to going to work tomorrow for the first time in months. Maybe the Blackwood house didn't have to be such a cold, lonely place after all. Maybe there were kind people there, people who saw her as more than just invisible hands that cleaned and polished and disappeared. She had no idea that the kindest person of all was the one she had spent the evening with, and that Alexander Blackwood was lying awake in his massive bedroom at that very moment, thinking about a conversation with a housekeeper that had made him feel more human than he had in years. The storm was clearing, and tomorrow would bring new possibilities for both of them, though neither could have imagined what those possibilities would entail. The next morning dawned bright and clear, as if the storm had washed the world clean. Maria arrived at the Blackwood estate an hour early, feeling more energetic than she had in weeks. The kindness Alex had shown her the night before had given her something she hadn't realized she was missing: hope. She went about her morning duties with unusual enthusiasm, humming softly as she dusted the library shelves and polished the silver in the dining room.
Even Mrs. Fairfax's sharp comments about the proper way to fold napkins couldn't dampen her mood.
Around 10 in the morning, as Maria was cleaning the windows in the main hallway, she heard Mr. Pemberton's crisp voice echoing from the foyer.
Mr. Blackwood will be working from home today, he was telling someone.
He's expecting several important calls from London, so please ensure he's not disturbed. Maria's heart rate picked up slightly. In 3 months, she had successfully avoided any real interaction with the master of the house. The brief glimpses she'd caught of him getting into the Bentley had been more than enough. She certainly didn't want to accidentally interrupt important business calls. She worked quickly and quietly, trying to finish the windows before there was any chance of an encounter. But, as she was cleaning the tall window that overlooked the front circular drive, she saw a familiar figure walking across the grounds. It was Alex, but he wasn't wearing his usual chauffeur's uniform. Instead, he was dressed in khaki pants and a navy sweater, walking toward the house with a golden retriever trotting beside him. The dog was clearly his companion, responding to his voice and staying close to his side. Maria watched through the glass as he stopped to throw a tennis ball for the dog, laughing when the retriever nearly knocked him over in enthusiasm. The sound of his laughter reached her even through the thick windows, and she found herself smiling. It was nice to see him relaxed and happy, away from the formal requirements of his job. She had wondered where he lived, probably in one of the small houses on the estate grounds that were designated for senior staff. The dog suddenly caught sight of something and took off running toward the gardens, with Alex jogging behind, calling, "Churchill! Get back here, you troublemaker!" Maria laughed softly at the sight, then quickly returned to her work. She shouldn't be watching the staff during their personal time, even if it was innocent. But, as she moved to the next window, she noticed something that made her pause. Alex was walking back toward the house, the dog now on a leash, but instead of going to a staff entrance or toward the grounds buildings, he was heading directly to the main front door. That was odd. Even senior staff typically used the side entrances unless specifically summoned to the main part of the house. Before she could think too much about it, the front door opened, and Mr. Pemberton appeared. "Good morning, Mr. Blackwood," the butler said with a formal bow. "Your coffee is waiting in the study, and I've arranged your calls as requested." Maria's cleaning cloth fell from her nerveless fingers. "Mr. Blackwood?" Alex was Mr. Blackwood? She stared through the window in shock as the man she had spent the evening with, the kind chauffeur who had driven her home in a storm, who had helped her pick up silverware, who had treated her with more respect than anyone in this house, walked through the front door like he belonged there. Because he did belong there. He owned it. Maria sank onto the window seat, her mind reeling. Alexander Blackwood, the billionaire, the man the staff whispered about in fearful tones, was Alex. The same Alex who had asked about her daughter, who had driven 20 miles through a storm to make sure she got home safely, who had spoken to her like she was a friend rather than hired help. Everything she thought she knew about her employer had just been turned upside down. The other staff members had painted him as cold, demanding, impossible to please. But Maria had experienced nothing but kindness from him. Either they were wrong about his character, or they had never actually interacted with him either. Maria thought about their conversation the night before, how he had asked what the other employees said about Mr. Blackwood, how he had seemed genuinely interested in her perspective on loneliness and isolation. He had been asking about himself, trying to understand how his own staff perceived him. The realization that she had been talking to a billionaire without knowing it should have been intimidating. Instead, Maria felt something else entirely: sadness. Alexander Blackwood was so disconnected from the people who worked for him that they didn't even recognize him. He was as invisible to them as they were to him, separated by assumptions and social barriers that neither side knew how to cross. Santos. Mr. Pemberton's sharp voice cut through her thoughts. "What are you doing sitting in the main hallway? The morning room needs attention, and the crystal in the dining room won't polish itself." Maria stood quickly, gathering her cleaning supplies. "Yes, sir. Right away." As she hurried toward the morning room, her mind was spinning with questions. Why had Alexander Blackwood let her believe he was a chauffeur? Why hadn't he corrected her assumption? And, more importantly, what was she supposed to do now that she knew the truth? She couldn't pretend she didn't know. But she also couldn't let on that she did know without explaining how she found out, which would mean revealing that he had driven her home last night. Something told her that such a revelation would not be well received by the other staff members. Maria spent the morning cleaning mechanically, her thoughts elsewhere. Every time she heard footsteps in the hallway, she wondered if it was him. What would she say? How was she supposed to act? Around noon, as she was dusting the books in the library, she heard a familiar voice in the corridor outside. "Thank you, Pemberton. I'll take my lunch in the garden today. It's too beautiful to stay inside." Maria's heart started pounding.
She could hear Alexander Blackwood, Alex, walking past the library door. Part of her hoped he would keep walking. Another part hoped he would stop. The footsteps paused. "Excuse me," his voice came from the doorway, and Maria turned slowly to face him. He was standing in the entrance to the library, dressed in the same casual clothes she had seen him in that morning. Without the formal chauffeur's uniform, he looked younger, more approachable. But now she could see things she had missed before: the expensive watch on his wrist, the confident way he carried himself, the unmistakable bearing of someone used to being in charge. "I wanted to thank you again for last night," he said quietly. "I hope you got home safely and weren't too late." Maria stared at him, uncertain how to respond. Should she acknowledge that she knew who he was? Should she pretend ignorance? Should she apologize for not recognizing him sooner? Yes, thank you," she managed. "I got home fine." He stepped into the library, closing the door behind him. The gesture felt significant, creating a private space in a house full of watching eyes and listening ears. "You know who I am now, don't you?" he said gently. Maria nodded, unable to speak. "I saw you at the window this morning." You had quite a shocked expression. "I'm sorry," Maria said quickly. "I didn't mean to spy. I was just cleaning, and I saw you with your dog, and when Mr. Pemberton called you, Maria." His voice was calm, kind, the same voice that had made her feel safe during the drive home. "You don't need to apologize. I'm the one who should be apologizing to you." "For what?" "For deceiving you. For letting you think I was someone else." Maria looked down at her hands, gripping the dust cloth tightly. "Why didn't you tell me who you were?" Alexander was quiet for a long moment. When she looked up, she saw him standing by one of the tall windows, looking out at the gardens where she had watched him walk alone so many evenings. "When was the last time someone talked to you honestly?" he asked. "Not because they wanted something from you, not because they were afraid of you, not because they were trying to impress you or manipulate you, but just because they saw you as a person worth talking to?" Maria thought about the question. "Last night," she said softly. "When I thought you were Alex the chauffeur." He turned back to face her, and she was surprised to see pain in his eyes. "I haven't had a real conversation with another human being in longer than I can remember," he said. "Everyone who talks to me wants something. Money, favors, connections. Or they're so intimidated by who I am that they can barely string a sentence together. But last night," Maria said, understanding beginning to dawn, "I talked to you like I was just a person. A kind person who had helped you when you needed it, but still just a person." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that seemed more vulnerable than anything else she had seen him do. "Do you have any idea how rare that is in my world?" Maria felt her heart aching for him. She thought about her earlier observation, about how he looked lonely walking through the gardens. She had been right, but the loneliness was deeper than she had imagined. "The other staff," she said carefully, "they've never actually talked to you, have they?" Alexander shook his head. "Mr. Pemberton handles all staff interactions. He has very firm ideas about maintaining proper boundaries between employer and employees. Most of the people who work here have never spoken directly to me, and I've never spoken directly to them. That's why they think you're cold and demanding." "Is that what they think?" Maria hesitated, then decided on honesty. If he wanted real conversation, she would give it to him. "They're afraid of you. They think you're quick to fire people, that you look through them like they're invisible. But I think they're afraid of what they imagine you to be, not who you actually are." "And what do you think I actually am?" The question hung in the air between them. Maria looked at this man, this billionaire who had driven her home in a storm, who had helped her pick up dropped silverware, who clearly spent his evenings walking alone through his gardens because he had no one to talk to. "I think you're lonely," she said softly. "I think you're trapped in a life that looks perfect from the outside but feels empty on the inside. I think you have money and power, but you don't have what everybody really needs. Which is to matter to someone. To be seen and valued for who you are, not what you own." Alexander stared at her for a long moment,
and Maria worried that she had gone too far. Speaking so directly to a billionaire about his personal life was probably grounds for immediate dismissal. But, instead of anger, she saw something like relief in his expression. "You're right," he said quietly. "I have everything money can buy, and I've never felt more isolated in my life." The admission hung in the air between them, honest and raw and completely unexpected. "I should get back to work," Maria said, though she made no move to leave. "Should you? Or should we have that conversation we started last night?" "Mr. Blackwood, Alex, he